Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big topics. Today, we're looking at a man whose name is, well, pretty famous, but whose actual story is even more incredible than you might think. Marco Polo. So let's start with this name, Il Milione. In Italian, that means the million.
Well, that was Marco Polo's nickname. His fellow Venetians gave it to him because of the stories he told, these wild tales of the immense, almost unbelievable wealth of the East. He was talking about riches counted not in thousands, but in millions. So how does a merchant's son from Venice end up with a story like that?
To really get the man, we've got to go back to where it all started, one of the world's great trading hubs, 13th century Venice.
So, Marco grew up totally surrounded by the business of trade, but he'd never met his own father. His dad, Niccolo, was already deep in Asia, even meeting the great Mongol ruler, Kublai Khan. I mean, can you imagine meeting your father for the very first time when you're 15 years old, only to find out he's come from a world you can't even fathom? For young Marco, this reunion was about to change his life and really the world's view of itself forever.
Just 2 years after that first meeting, Marco's father and uncle set off again for the East. And this time, 17-year-old Marco went with them. Look, this wasn't just a trip. It was a multi-decade odyssey. Just think about that for a second. The sheer duration of his time away. He left Venice as a teenager and wouldn't see it again until he was a middle-aged man. And get this, for 17 of those years, he wasn't just a visitor in China. Nope, he was actually serving the great Khan himself. And in total, they traveled nearly 15,000 miles. That's 24,000 kilometers. For the time, that distance was almost unimaginable, crossing deserts, mountains, and seas.
And here's the crucial point. Marco wasn't just some tourist wandering around. He was an official for the most powerful ruler on Earth. This gave him unprecedented access, a real inside look at the workings of the Yuan dynasty, its culture, its technologies, and how it was all governed.
So how did this incredible story ever make its way to the rest of the world? Well, ironically, it took a war and a prison cell. Think about that for a second. Without this chance encounter, this random meeting in a Genoese prison, the world might never have heard his detailed account. It was the perfect storm, right? The adventurer with the story and the storyteller with the pen. And what a narrative it was.
And this really gets to his main achievement. He didn't just tell an adventure story, he delivered a detailed report on a highly advanced civilization. For a feudal Europe running on gold, silver, and wood, the idea of a government just printing money from paper, or a society burning black stones for fuel, it must have sounded like something out of science fiction. These concepts were absolutely revolutionary.
Now, for centuries, people have questioned if his story was even true. They point to some pretty strange omissions, like the Great Wall. But here's the thing. Historians note that the wall we all think of today was mostly built by the Ming Dynasty, like 2 centuries later. The Mongol rulers he served wouldn't have needed it. And the details he did get right, stuff about currency, salt revenues, and specific events that have been confirmed by other records, those are things he simply couldn't have known without being there.
So why does a 13th century merchant still matter to us today? Well, it all comes down to his legacy.
And the lesson here is pretty profound. One person's journey, when it's documented and shared, can literally change the map. Christopher Columbus was so inspired by Polo's descriptions of Asian riches that his personal copy of the book was filled with his own notes. You see, Polo's account didn't just describe the world, it inspired a whole new generation to go out and see it for themselves.
Oh, and just to clear up a popular myth while we're at it, Marco Polo did not introduce pasta to Italy. Nope, pasta in various forms was already there. That whole story actually started as a 20th century marketing campaign for a Canadian pasta company. A clever bit of advertising for sure, but definitely not history. And this brings us to his final words. On his deathbed in 1324, as family and friends were urging him to take back all the so-called fables in his book, Marco Polo allegedly replied, "I have not told half of what I saw." That's a stunning final statement, isn't it? He wasn't exaggerating, he was just editing. It just leaves us to wonder, what other marvels did he witness, but never share? What was in the other half of the story? Well, that's something we can only imagine.